In the Wild West, getting hurt wasn't a question of if, it was when. And when it happened, you were on your own. No clinics, no ambulances, no or visits, just your grit. A bottle of whiskey, and whatever was left in your saddlebag. That's how cowboys survived without doctors, and sometimes how they did in single quotes first aid. Try first panic you get thrown from a horse, your arms bent wrong, your ribs crack with every breath. No white coats appear. No nurses rushing, just your buddy saying, "You'll be fine," as he pours bourbon into the dirt beside you. The cowboy solution: tie it tight, drink enough to forget, keep riding. Sometimes that worked. Sometimes it just delayed the problem long enough for it to kill you quietly. Saddlebag medicine. A cowboy's saddlebag was his pharmacy. It didn't hold gauze and antibiotics. It held a knifey, a tin of lard, old rags, whiskizeltand. If you were lucky, a jar of Bear Grace. It was it. If you got cut, you cleaned it with whiskey. If you got shot, you bit down on your belt and hoped someone had a strong stomach. One cowboy wrote in his journal, "My medicine kit's a bottle and a rope. The bottle for the pain, the rope to keep me still. Broken bones, just keep going. There were no casts. No X-rays. No clean white splints. If a cowboy broke something, it was set right there, under the sun, using whatever was nearby: a shovel handle, a saddle horn, a tree branch. Bones didn't always heal straight. Fingers healed crooked. Legs never fully bent again. You limped, rode differently, adjusted your saddle, and learned to live with it. And if you passed out from the pain, they gave you more whiskey. Bleeding? That's what fires for deep cut. You couldn't just wait for it to stop. You had to burn. It shut. Cowboys carried hot irons, coals, or even gun barrels. If bleeding got bad, they'd heat the metal and press it to the wound. The sound, unforgettable. The smell, worse, but it worked. Sometimes. Other times, infection just came back stronger. But out there, it was better to burn than to bleed out. Snake bites and bad luck. You think snake bites were treated calmly. Think again. Most cowboys did three things: yelled, swore, reached for the whiskey. Some tried sucking the venom out. Others sliced the bite open and poured in salt. A few just cut the whole thing off and hoped for the best. Doctors, too far, too expensive. Besides, you weren't riding 40 miles for someone to tell you what you already knew. That's gonna hurt. Fever, chills, and midnight sweats out on the range. Sickness was just part of life. You got feverish. You wrapped yourself in a blanket, sweated it out, and hoped you woke up. Tea from wild sage helped. So did chewing bark or pouring vinegar into your boots to balance the heat. No one knew if it worked, but they kept doing it because they had nothing else. And sometimes, just sometimes, it worked well enough to survive. A bullet, a busted rib, a festering wound. These weren't things you treated. They were things you survived or didn't. And out there, with no doctor in sight, cowboys became their own surgeons. Only problem, their tools were made for cattle, not for people. The knife you ate with and cut with. Every cowboy had a knife. They used it to cut meat, shape rope, skin rabbits, and when it came down to it, dig bullets out of their own leg. No anesthesia. No sterile field. Just a belt between the teeth, a prayer, and a friend willing to hold your leg down. They heated the blade over fire, scraped the skin, dug until metal clicked, pulled it out, poured in whiskey, and pressed the wound shut with their hand. It wasn't pretty, but it was the only option, sewing flesh like a saddle when a wound gaped too wide. Cowboys reached for whatever resembled thread. Horsehair, botlachant, strips of rawood, even fishing line. If they had eaten for a needle, a sharpened bone, a bent nail, sometimes the same one they used on saddles. They stitched flesh like leather, rough, uneven, hard. The goal wasn't beauty. It was don't fall apart. One cowhand told his trail boss, "I sewed up my thigh. Stitching ain't even, but neither." AM1 infections came free even when you stopped the bleeding. The worst was ahead. Infection didn't knock. It just walked in, red streaks creeping up your arm, pus bubbling from a cut, heat radiating off skin like stove iron. Cowboys had one response: ignore it until you couldn't. Then came poultices, chewed tobacco, mashed onions, crushed herbs. Some men boiled bark in creek water and poured it on the wound. Others just grit their teeth and hope for the best. And if it didn't work, you wrapped the whole thing in a blanket, hid the smell, and kept riding. Broken teeth and bloody gums toothish. On the trail, you were doomed. The pain could drive a man half mad. No sleep, no food, just pulsing agony. Cowboys tried, pouring whiskey on the gums-burning tobacco, and breathing it Indian twine around the tooth and yanking or letting a friend knock it out with. The butt of a revolver, none of it was gentle. All of it was final. More than one cowboy was found with a tooth tied to a saddle horn, left behind like a warning. Eye injuries, hope for darkness, a flicked spur, a snapped twig, a misfired shot. Eye wounds were terrifying and untreatable. There were no patches, no surgeons, just a dirty rag, a wide-brimmed hat, and prayers for shadow. Some covered the bad eye with soot and grease. Others rode with one eye shut for months, hoping it cleared up. Sometimes it did. Most times, it didn't. A saloon in Arizona had a wall of glass eyes left by men who couldn't afford to keep them. Heat, dust, and swelling you couldn't stop. West wasn't kind to wounds. Heat made everything worse. This blew into every cut. Saddles rubbed. Sores into infections. Boots turned blisters into open wounds. And swelling, that was the body's way of saying, we're losing. Cowboys used Cold Creek stone sweat moss snow. If they were luckier, just elevated the limb and drank until they passed out. Nothing elegant. Just instinct and endurance. And yet, they kept going. The amazing thing, most of them survived. Not because their methods were good, but because they were too stubborn to quit. They lived with pain. They made friends with scars. And when something rotted, they cut it off and moved on. Because in the Old West, survival wasn't clean. It was ugly, homemade, and full of mistakes. But it worked, more often than it should have. When you live hundreds of miles from civilization, you stop asking, does it work? You start asking, do we have it? That's what cowboy medicine looked like. A handful of items, endless confidence, and zero guarantee. It wasn't science. It was survival through superstition, habit, and hope. Let's walk through the frontiers. Strangest pharmacy. Whiskey was everything. If it burned, you poured whiskey on it. If it hurt, you drank whiskey for it. If you had nothing else, you believed in whiskey. Cowboys carried flasks not just for fun, but because whiskey was painkiller disenchantment. Sometimes breakfast got a toothache, swish whiskey, snake bite. Pour whiskey in the wound. Bullet, pour it on and drink the rest. Did it help? Not always, but it gave you a moment of numbness, and that was often enough. Pepper, salt, and dust. Spice rack wasn't for dinner, it was for injuries. Black pepper was packed into cuts to dry them out. Salt was rubbed into wounds to kill infection. Ashes and dust mixed into paste for sucking poison. One rancher swore by tobacco ash and bear grease. Another smeared dried sage into blisters. These weren't remedies, they were bets against time. Infection and pain. Leeches in the saddlebags. Some cowboys used leeches, especially if they'd picked up the habit from old military surgeons or bloodmen. Traveling with the wagon trains. Leeches were used for fever, swelling, bad blood. You tied the leech to the wound, watched it swell, and hoped whatever was inside left with it. Some men swore they worked. Others said, the leech lived. I didn't feel better, but the leech looked great. Onion vinegar and prairie teeth. Cowboys knew herbs, not always the right ones, but they tried. Onion poultices were laid on chest infections. Apple cider vinegar was used for rashes, bites. Feversage tea, willow bark, and chewed cactus root were standard medicine. Only recipe for cowboy cough syrup included boiled onions, whiskey, and a dash of gunpowder. They drank it. Then they slept. That was the goal. Sleep through the pain, and maybe wake up better. The mustard plaster. Methadone of the strangest and most beloved treatments was the mustard plaster, made from ground mustard seeds, vinegar, animal fat. Sometimes soap. It was smeared on cloth and pressed against the chest or back. The idea? Burn the skin enough to distract from the illness inside. Did it cure pneumonia? No, but you forgot you had it for a while. Some cowboys walked around with bright red skin and called it healing. The placebo of pain. Out here, pain was expected. If a treatment didn't hurt, they didn't trust it. They believed the burn meant it worked, sting meant it was cleaning. The swelling was badness leaving the body. One cowboy claimed, "If it hurts like the devil, it's probably chasing him out." In that logic, suffering wasn't a side effect, it was a sign of progress. Superstition and snake charms. When medicine ran out, some turned to the strange. Rabbit foot under the pillow for fever, horsehair bracelet for blood circulation, retalix. Rattle in your hat to keep spirits away, 3 rocks by your head to draw out dreams of sickness. You laugh, but these were serious to them. Cowboys weren't always religious, but they believed in signs, luck, and ritual. One man carved nitrogen monoxide sick into his belt. He never took it off, and he never got sick. Coincidence? Maybe, but out. Their belief was often stronger than medicine. Pain was a teacher in the end. Cowboy healing wasn't about curing. It was about enduring. They learned to live with pain like it was a saddle. Stiff at first, but eventually part of the ride. They stopped expecting to feel better. They just hoped to feel enough to get back on the horse. Because the only thing worse than hurting was slowing down. No matter how tough you were, how many blisters you pushed through, how much whiskey you drank or mustard you smeared on your chest, sometimes it wasn't enough. And in the Wild West, when a cowboy's body gave out, there was no doctor to whisper, "We did all we could." There was only the trail, the sky, and what your friends could carry. When a fever wouldn't break, it often started simple: a cough, a headache, a chill. The cowboy shrugged it off, kept riding, kept working. But at night, the fever climbed. The chills turned to sweat. By morning, he could barely sit his horse. They made a bedroll under the wagon, poured water on his brow, wrapped him in coats. But there were no antibiotics, no thermometers, no plan, just firelight, silence, and someone quietly asking, "You want a drink?" Some got better, many didn't. The good deaf cowboys didn't expect comfort at the end. They just wanted it to be quick, or quiet, or both. A good deaf meant you weren't alone, you weren't screaming. Samin would say a few words, and remember your name. Bad deaths were messy, loud. Sometimes they happened mid-ride. A man slumped in the saddle, eyes open, already gone. Other times it came slowly, infection in the leg, blood in the lungs, breath rattling like wind in an old barn. No morphine, no clean sheets. Just dust and moonlight, and the boots you never took off. What friends did when a man died out there, it was up to his friends. There were no undertakers, no pine boxes delivered with flowers. You dug with what you had: a shovel, a pickaxe, your hands. Sometimes the body was wrapped in a blanket, sometimes in his coat. One cowboy was buried with his hat over his face, boots still on, hand gripping the reins of a broken bridle. If there was time, someone said a few words. If not, silence, then dirt, then dust, then you rode on. Grave markers and memory. They didn't carve tombstones. They used what they had: a stick, a rock, a rusted horseshoe hung from a post, sometimes just a boot tied to a tree. One trail boss marked graves with empty whiskey bottles placed on top. Another buried his men near rivers, so they'd always be moving. But the truth was, most were forgotten. The West swallowed stories fast. If your name wasn't written down, it was gone with the wind. When there was no one left, sometimes there was no one to help. A lone cowboy, hurt, sick, stranded. No fire, no shovel, no final words. That's when the landscape did the burying. The sand, the rain, the wild things. Your bones became part of the trail. Your gear was scattered by coyotes. Your hat rolled away in the wind, never found. And one day, another rider passed by, saw the glint of a spur in the dirt, and said nothing, because he'd seen it before. Why they kept going, so why risk it? Why live like that, with pain, fear, and no doctor in sight? Because the West was never about safety. It was about freedom. You lived by your grit. You died by your luck. And in between, you held on with everything you had. Cowboys didn't ride because it was easy. They rode because it was the only thing that made sense, even if it killed them. Final thought: there were no white walls out here. No gentle voices, no promises. Just dust, danger, and whatever you could carry in your saddlebag. And somehow, through all that, they kept going. That's how cowboys survived without doctors, some of them.